My son pushed me down the steps after I refused to co-sign his home. His wife smirked. At least be useful for. Can you imagine being pushed down a flight of stairs by your own son? Left there, bleeding, while his wife smirked and told you to be useful for once. Old man? Well, they got their wish. Because what happened next was me using everything I had to utterly destroy their lives. And I don't regret a single second of it. Look, I'm just a 58-year-old retired HVAC tech from Ohio. For 32 years, I crawled through sweltering attics and frozen basements, fixing units in 100-degree heat just so my family could have a decent life. I've got scars on my hands from sheet metal cuts, permanent calluses that no amount of lotion can fix. I worked hard. I raised 2 kids. I paid off my house. I saved for retirement the hard way. No rich relatives, no lottery, no lucky breaks. Just decades of honest work, calloused hands, and a whole lot of 5 a.m. alarm clocks. My wife, Linda, she passed away from cancer 8 years ago. God, I miss that woman. She was the glue, you know. She held our whole world together. When she left us, cracks started showing in places I never expected. She had this way of seeing trouble coming a mile off, heading it off at the pass. She could read people better than anyone I've ever met. Without her, all those little problems she would have nipped in the bud just kept growing. And that brings me to my son, Brandon. He's 32 now. From the moment that kid could talk, he had an excuse for everything. Failed a spelling test? Teacher's fault. Benched in Little League? Coach was playing favorites. Didn't get invited to a birthday party? Those kids were jerks anyway. Nothing was ever his fault. Not once in 32 years has that kid looked in a mirror and said, maybe I could have done something differently. Maybe I bear some responsibility for what happened. Never. Linda, bless her soul, used to tell me he'd grow out of it. Said boys mature slower. He just needed time. She was wrong about that one. Some people never grow out of anything because no one ever makes them face consequences. My daughter, Katie, she's 29, and she's the complete opposite. Night and day, those two. Same parents, same house, same opportunities. But Katie worked 2 jobs through college, maintained a full course load, volunteered at a food bank on weekends, graduated with honors, had 3 job offers before she even got her diploma. Now she runs her own accounting firm, a dozen employees, clients all over the Midwest. Built it from scratch, from her apartment, with just a laptop and a dream. She calls me every Sunday, without fail. Visits on holidays, even if it means driving 4 hours in bad weather. Remembers my birthday, without a Facebook reminder. She's proof I didn't completely fail as a parent. At least one of them turned out right. Brandon, though, he bounced from job to job like a pinball. Couldn't hold anything down for more than 6 months, sometimes not even 3. Always drama. Coworkers who didn't appreciate his genius. Managers threatened by his brilliant ideas. Always some perfectly reasonable explanation why that job wasn't worthy of his extraordinary talents. He had a business administration degree, stretched into 6 years, which I'm pretty sure was mostly parties and video games. He treated that diploma like it made him royalty walking among peasants, too good for entry-level work. Then came Heather. She's 30. My Linda always said I was too cynical, too quick to judge. She was probably right. But Heather, she set off alarm bells the first night Brandon brought her home. Something about her just felt off. I'd made pot roast, set the good table, even lit a candle. And Heather just sat there, her eyes wandering around my house like she was appraising it for an estate sale. Before we even finished eating, she asked how much my property was worth. My retirement accounts. My life insurance beneficiaries. Other properties, investments. I thought maybe she was just awkward. Nope. Looking back, she was shopping, taking inventory, calculating how to get access to it. Heather came from money, not earned money, but inherited money that her parents had mostly blown by the time she was in high school. Bad investments, expensive tastes they couldn't afford. By the time she was an adult, all that was left were the expensive tastes and a minimum wage budget to fund them. And she saw Brandon as her ticket back to the lifestyle she thought she deserved. Problem was, Brandon was broke. drowning in credit card debt, student loans. So Heather's calculating eyes landed on me and stayed there, like a target lock. The wedding planning was a circus. $40,000. They wanted me to cover half. 20 grand for a party they'd forget in a month. I worked overtime for years to save that kind of money. I offered 5,000. Brandon still owed me 8 grand from loans over the years, car repairs that became gaming consoles, rent money that became vacations. We both knew that 8 grand was gone forever, but we pretended otherwise. That's what family does, right? Heather threw an absolute fit when I wouldn't budge. Called me cheap. Right there in my own living room. Said I was embarrassing her. Said I clearly didn't love my son if I wasn't willing to invest in his future happiness. Brandon just sat there, nodding along like a bobblehead. Never once defended me. Never told her to calm down. Just let it happen. The wedding was scaled back, of course. Her parents didn't have much money either. But that resentment Heather felt toward me, that never went away. It festered like an untreated infection, growing worse and more toxic with time. Every holiday dinner, I could feel her eyes on me, calculating, waiting, planning her next move. 4 or 5 years after the wedding, I watched my son disappear. The Brandon I raised, flawed as he was, at least had a spark of independence. Now he was a puppet, repeating whatever she told him to say, doing whatever she told him to do. She controlled everything. Their finances, their social calendar, their opinions. Brandon didn't have thoughts anymore. He had Heather's thoughts delivered through his mouth. And those shared opinions increasingly centered around one theme: what I owed them. My house. A modest 3-bedroom ranch. I bought it in the early 90s for $120,000. Now it's worth close to $400,000. Between the house equity, my retirement savings, and Linda's life insurance that I'd barely touched, I was comfortable. Not rich, but secure. To people like Heather, that security looked like an opportunity waiting to be exploited. The ask started small. Car payment. Electric bill. A couple thousand for a much-needed vacation. Just this once. They'd pay me back. And every time I said yes, I was priming the pump for the next request. Training them. Every time I said no, I got the cold shoulder. Katie saw it. She warned me, told me they were using me, that I needed firm boundaries. But he was my son, my flesh and blood. How do you give up on your own kid? How do you look at the child you raised and say, enough, I'm done helping you? Linda would have known what to do. But Linda was gone, and I was just fumbling around in the dark. Turns out, giving up on your own kid becomes pretty easy when he shoves you down a flight of stairs. It was a Sunday afternoon in March. The weather was warming up. I was doing laundry, enjoying a quiet day. Brandon and Heather showed up unannounced, their usual style. Never called ahead. Harder to turn someone away when they're on your porch. I let them in, offered coffee and cookies. But I could feel it, something bigger was coming. Heather had that look she gets before a significant ask. Brandon was fidgeting like a nervous kid outside the principal's office. After some painful small talk, Heather finally got to the point. They'd found their dream home. A $450,000 colonial. She pulled out her phone, showing me pictures like a real estate agent. I knew their combined income, on a good year, was maybe 70 grand. They had credit card debt piled high, 2 car payments. Their credit scores looked like bowling scores. There was no way any sane mortgage lender would approve them unless someone with better credit co-signed. That someone, they decided, was me. Heather laid it all out like a Fortune 500 proposal. If I co-signed and put up my house as collateral, they could get approved. Easy peasy. No big deal. They'd never miss a payment, she promised, with that too-wide smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was an investment in their future, in my future grandchildren's future. I'd barely even know I was involved. Just some signatures and everyone would be happy. I sat there, listening, watching Heather's animated gestures, Brandon's nervous nodding. All I could think about was the 32 years I'd spent crawling through crawl spaces. The decades of careful saving. Linda's life insurance. They wanted me to put all of that at risk. Everything I'd worked for. Everything Linda and I had built. They wanted me to bet it all on their ability to make payments on a house they clearly couldn't afford, knowing full well that when they defaulted, not if, but when, it would be my house on the chopping block. My retirement. My security. My future.
Gone.
I said no. Not maybe. Not let me think about it. Just no. A complete sentence. Final answer. No explanation needed. Heather's fake sweetness vanished. The mask dropped. I saw pure, cold venom. She started in on me. How I was sitting on all this money while my son struggled. How I was selfish, small-minded. How I'd clearly never wanted Brandon to succeed. Then she played her trump card. She said Linda, my dead wife, would be ashamed of me if she could see how I was treating her only son. That Linda would never have let Brandon struggle like this. Using my dead wife's name. The woman I loved for 30 years and still missed every single day. Using her to manipulate me into a bad financial decision. Invoking her name like she was some weapon. That's when I knew there was absolutely no bottom to how low this woman would go. I told them both to leave. To get out of my house immediately. I was done being their piggy bank. Done being guilt-tripped. Done pretending this was a normal, healthy family relationship when it was clearly just a long con. Brandon stood up. For a brief moment, I thought, maybe he'd apologize. Maybe some part of my real son was still in there, buried under Heather's influence and his own weakness. Maybe he'd finally snap out of it. Stand up to his wife, for once. Choose his father over her greed. Instead, he got right up in my face. Started yelling. His finger jabbing my chest with each accusation. Calling me pathetic, bitter, old. Saying I'd die alone, clutching all my money. That I was a failure as a father, always favoring Katie, never giving him a fair chance. So, I told him the truth. Told him to grow up. Take some responsibility for once. Told him real men don't blame their fathers for their own failures at 32. Told him if he wanted a nice house, maybe he should try holding down a job for more than 6 months instead of expecting everyone else to fund his lifestyle. That's when he shoved me. I was standing at the top of my basement stairs. The door was open because I'd been doing laundry. One hard shove to my chest, both hands, and I went backward. Into empty air, where the floor should have been. 14 steps. I counted them later, in the hospital, giving my statement. 14 wooden steps between the main floor and the concrete basement. I don't remember hitting every single one, but I remember enough. The jarring impact on my shoulder against the wall. The crack of my wrist as I tried to catch myself. The final thud when I hit the bottom. Everything went white with pain. I lay there on that cold concrete floor, struggling to breathe, looking up at the rectangle of light. I saw Brandon standing there, frozen, his face white, like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. And then Heather appeared next to him, looking down at me. I watched her expression shift. Surprise, then calculation, then something that might have been satisfaction. Be useful for once, old man, she said, with that smirk on her face that I'll remember until the day I die. Just sign the papers, and we can pretend this never happened. Be useful for once. I told them to get out, or I was calling the police. Brandon started panicking then, suddenly remembering I was his father, and he might have just committed a serious felony. He tried to come down, playing the concerned son. But Heather grabbed his arm and pulled him back. She said I was probably fine, probably exaggerating for sympathy. Then they left. I heard the front door close. Their car start, pull away, and I was alone, at the bottom of my stairs. My phone sitting in the kitchen. I lay there for probably 20 minutes before I could move. I crawled up those stairs on my hands and one good knee. By the time I reached the top, I was drenched in sweat, shaking. I got to my phone. Called Katie first. Then 911. The ambulance came. Paramedics were gentle. The police came, asked questions. A fractured hip, needing surgery. A broken wrist, needing pins. Bruised ribs that made every breath feel like getting stabbed. At 58, those aren't injuries you just bounce back from. I spent 4 days in the hospital, 3 weeks in rehab, learning to walk again. Lots of time staring at ceilings. Lots of time thinking. About my son. about the excuses I'd made, about how I'd let Heather poison everything. Katie visited me every single day, brought me coffee, crossword puzzles, updates on the investigation. She never once said, "I told you so." Not once. Even though she'd been warning me for years. That's the difference between my two kids right there. One visits you in the hospital every day. The other one put you there. When the detective came for my formal statement, I told her everything. Not just the shove. The years of financial manipulation. The constant demands. The guilt trips. The isolation. I told her about Heather's comment while I lay there in pain. I told her I wanted to press charges. All of them. Whatever she could make stick. She explained what Brandon did wasn't just simple assault. Given my age and injuries, it was felonious assault. A second-degree felony, serious prison time. And Heather, encouraging him, making demands, not calling for help, could be charged as an accomplice. I gave her everything she needed. Medical records, names of neighbors, cell phone records. Everything. And here's where it gets really interesting. My neighbor, Frank, had installed a Ring doorbell camera last year. It caught Brandon and Heather arriving. More importantly, it caught them leaving 3 minutes after they would have pushed me. The timestamp proved they hadn't stuck around. And Heather? She was laughing about something as she got in the car. Laughing while I was lying on concrete with broken bones. The detective also got their cell phone records. Dozens of text messages exchanged in the days after, trying to coordinate their story. Say I tripped and fell. Say he was confused. Discussing whether they should claim I had dementia. All of it documented, in their own words. But the real kicker, the thing that turned this from a family dispute into a clear pattern of criminal behavior? They'd done similar things before. The detective dug into their backgrounds. Heather's elderly aunt had filed a police report 2 years earlier, claiming Heather threatened her after she refused to change her will. The aunt dropped charges, but the report was still there. And 3 years before that, Brandon had been formally accused of shoving a coworker during an argument. The company settled quietly, fired Brandon. Another incident. Another pattern. Another time my son put his hands on someone and got away with it because people covered for him. A history of violence. A pattern of targeting vulnerable people for money. Brandon was arrested at his apartment 2 weeks later, while I was still in rehab. Katie sent me his mugshot. He was crying when they cuffed him. Looked lost and confused, like he still couldn't understand how his actions could have real consequences. Heather was arrested the same day, at her workplace. Charged as an accomplice. Charged with tampering with evidence for those texts. Her mugshot showed pure fury. She wasn't sorry. She was just angry she got caught. The trial was 8 months later. I had to testify. One of the hardest things I've ever done. Sitting on that stand, looking at my son in his orange jumpsuit, describing what he did, what Heather said. Watching his face. The defense tried to paint me as vindictive. Suggested I'd exaggerated my injuries. But the evidence was overwhelming. Medical records, security footage, their own texts, the prior incidents. The prosecutor laid it all out methodically, piece by piece, like building a brick wall around them. Brandon was convicted of felonious assault, targeting a victim over 60. The judge called his behavior a betrayal of everything family is supposed to mean. Heather was convicted of complicity, tampering, and obstruction. The judge had even harsher words for her. Said she not only encouraged the violence, but actively worked to cover it up, showing zero remorse. Brandon got 4 years in state prison. Heather got 3 years in a women's facility. The day they were sentenced, I watched them led away in handcuffs. Brandon was crying. Heather was stone-faced and furious. Katie squeezed my hand. That was 7 months ago. I'm doing better now. Much better. The hip healed pretty well. I still use a cane sometimes when it's cold, but most days I'm fine. Katie moved back to town temporarily to help me during recovery. And honestly, having her around has been the best thing to come out of this whole nightmare. We've gotten closer than we've been since she was a kid. 3 weeks ago, Brandon asked me to visit him at the prison. He'd been writing letters for months. The usual stuff about accountability classes and personal growth. I decided to go. Not to forgive him. not to hear his apologies. I went to tell him what I'd done while he was locked up. The visiting room was exactly what you'd expect. Plastic chairs, vending machines, guards everywhere. Brandon came out in his orange jumpsuit, looking 10 years older. Prison will do that to you. He sat down and immediately launched into his rehearsed apology speech. Accountability classes, eyes opened, changed man. I let him finish. Didn't interrupt. Didn't react. Just sat there. Then I started talking. I told him I'd sold my house. Got $410,000 for it. All cash. Quick closing. The buyers were a nice young couple, expecting their first baby, fell in love with the neighborhood. I moved into a nice 2-bedroom condo closer to Katie and the grandkids. Lower maintenance, better security, no basement stairs to worry about. I told him I'd updated my will. Katie gets everything. Every penny. Every asset, every possession. Brandon's name isn't anywhere in that document. He gets nothing. Not a single cent when I'm gone. I told him I'd also filed a civil lawsuit against him and Heather while they were incarcerated and couldn't do anything about it. Their assets were frozen. Their car got repossessed. Their apartment lease was terminated for non-payment, and their stuff was put in storage, racking up fees they can't pay. Heather's parents stopped making payments on her car the moment they saw the lawsuit. They didn't want any part of it. I told him that when he gets out in 3.5 years, he'll have absolutely nothing waiting for him. No wife, since Heather filed for divorce last month and listed him as the cause of all her problems. No savings. No credit. No family support because he burned every bridge. And I told him that Katie already got the paperwork filed with the court to ensure he can never come within 500 feet of her kids. My grandkids will grow up never knowing their uncle. And that's exactly how it should be. Brandon just sat there, staring at me, the color drained from his face. I don't think he'd realized until that exact moment how thoroughly he destroyed his own life. He'd been so focused on what prison was doing to him, feeling sorry for himself, counting down the days, that he hadn't stopped to think about what would be waiting for him on the outside. He started crying. Asked me why I was doing this to him. Said he was sorry. Said he'd genuinely changed. Said we could rebuild our relationship. I stood up from that plastic chair. And I told him something my wife, Linda, used to say to the kids when they were young and thought they could get away with anything. Actions have consequences. You don't get to shove your father down a flight of stairs and then cry about the fallout when it arrives. Then I walked out of that visiting room. And I haven't been back since. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a hard line with family, even when it hurt? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.